We are going to look at art since 1945 to around the mid 70s. And we're really going to concentrate on American art, where the United States becomes the center of the art world after the Nazis invade Paris in the early 40s, late 30s. Can't remember the exact date right off the top of my head, but in that era where the Nazis invade France, the art world moves out of France. Galleries, artists, basically anyone who can get out, and especially since a lot of modern artists were Jewish also, they knew it was time to go. And Hitler hated modern artists as well. His art was very artificial and very naturalistic, nothing like what we saw from Cubism and the Expressionists. So we're going to start with art from 1945. There are two parts to this lecture, from modern to postmodern. So we are looking at art made by people who fought in World War II, fought the Germans, fought the Japanese, lived through a depression, fought in Korea. They are known as the greatest generation. And when the generation gets back from World War II, the late 1940s and 50s, that's when we see the rise of suburban housing developments put together as a thank you to veterans with low interest loans to buy houses. They start families. Generally, most middle-class families have one car. One parent works, is able to feed the family, able to buy a house, and then one parent generally stays at home and raises children. And you can see from this suburb that we're looking at that we have a housing development that is really isolated in terms of shopping centers and things like that. So if you don't have a car, you're really somewhat isolated in the house. The right image is from the children of the World War II generation. They're known as the baby boomers, a rash of kids born before men went off to war to fight and when they came back. And this boom in our population, that generation, they end up resisting the war in Vietnam. They end up resisting the normality of what they grew up in, that everyone's house is the same, everybody kind of acts the same. They are struggling with black people for civil rights, and black people are also part of the World War II generation, fought in the war as well, came back home to racism and not being treated poorly by the country that they fought and died for. The baby boomer generation, they are going to be real innovators in terms of how they're going to live their life. They're innovators in music, in rock and roll. They are innovators in art as well. And we're going to see a lot of things kind of changing in art as we go along. Two major influences on American art. Jackson Pollock, he is the painter who took the canvas off the wall and started dripping it, creating these abstract textures of drips. He was announced in Life magazine, a very important magazine, as the greatest artist in the world. First time an American had ever been thought to be the most important innovator in the world. On the right is John Cage. He's a composer and music theorist. He taught music at UCLA, I believe, and he came up with a performance in 1952 called 4 minutes and 33 seconds, where a performer sits at a piano and does nothing for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And within that space of time, as you're anticipating music, your ears open up and the whole world becomes a possibility of music. John Cage is encouraging art to consider things besides painting. He says something along the lines, hey, painting is boring. It's been around for 2,000 years. What else can you do? What about an art that is like theater? What about something else? And we're going to see that happen as well. The first movement in the United States is called the New York School, or Abstract Expressionism. So the abstract geometric art that we saw in the last lecture, coming out of Dutch de Stijl, coming out of Germany at the Bauhaus, coming out of Russian constructivism, that abstraction getting away from any recognizable subject matter will continue in America in a more drippy, less rigid kind of way. And they are known as the New York School. There is no actual physical school. That is just a nickname. It's artists who were working in New York City in the 40s and the 50s, working in this abstract method. And there are two basic forms of this kind of painting. Action painting, like we see with Jackson Pollock, like we see with the only European of the group, William de Kooning, and then also color field painting, like we get in the horizontal bands of Mark Rothko, where the colors vibrate slightly on each other, and sitting in front of them causes you to meditate in a way. They're very calming. De Kooning is the one artist who's not completely abstract in phases of his career. In his women, we still see pieces of a woman here, but the moment that we're trying to find the entire woman, her body kind of fractures and falls apart. Is this an arm? Where is the shoulder? Is that her hair? He calls it a slipping glimpse, that as you're seeing the figure is disappearing also at the same time. A second wave of abstract artists include women Louise Nevelson, who creates sculptures out of found objects, kind of like Dada artists were doing, and then taking those objects, putting them in separate containers, and some of the objects are recognizable from what they are, some of them maybe not so, and then she kind of neutralizes them all the way that Picasso neutralizes perspective, where there is no back and front. She kind of neutralizes that by painting them all one monochromatic color. On the right with Helen Frankenthaler, she is painting on unprimed canvas with no gesso on it. And when that happens, the paint seeps into the fibers. And as it seeps into the fibers, it begins to kind of move on its own. So these edges are not necessarily controlled by the artist. They are controlled by how much paint you put on a surface and how it wants to seep into the surface. And you can see she's got a really nice sense of abstract asymmetry, positive, negative space, and color within her work. Franz Klein and Robert Motherwell are two other action painters, both working in black and white. Franz Klein's work almost harkens back to something that could be nearly like Chinese calligraphy, and Motherwell is working large with his elegies to the Spanish Republic in black and white. The next wave then out of abstraction, as we're moving out of abstraction, is known as Neo-Dada. And there are two artists, both Jasper Johns and then Robert Rauschenberg, who is pictured in both images here. Robert Rauschenberg is making what he calls combined paintings. In combined paintings, he's confusing us with sculpture, relief sculpture, and painting. He is definitely painting abstractly with color field and drips in places, but he's also using collage, he's also silk screening, and he's using recognizable features as well. So is monogram, is that a sculpture? Is that a painting? Is it something in between both of them? From the advice of John Cage, we get happenings. Alan Karprow is a art theorist and a artist, and he begins to have these happenings. And in these happenings, what we're seeing is a kind of performance going on. So it's not a play, it's not a movie, there's really no script or story. It is just in an art space, and the rules for art are really becoming, if an artist calls it art, it's art. If it happens in an art space or around an art space, it's art. And in performance, you can designate some action as art, like we're seeing in the courtyard. There's a scaffolding here, and then that scaffolding is wrapped in black paper. There are ladders leading up to the top of the scaffolding, which has mattresses on it. A performer climbs to the top of the mattress with photographers photographing her all the way. She lays down on the mattress, and then there is a covering here that's going to slowly descend and cover her, and that will be the end of the performance. The audience is involved in the performance by sweeping up parts of the dirty courtyard. So the idea that the audience is not just passive anymore is becoming part of art. As we get to the baby boomers in the 60s and the 70s, we're going to see also new forms of art, influenced definitely from the 50s and from the happenings and the kinds of neo-Dada work that's going on. We're looking here at Nam June Paik and his collaborator Charlotte Moorman. Charlotte Moorman is a cellist and a performer, and Nam June Paik is a video artist. We're seeing a picture of her playing a guitar on the left in her TV bra for living sculpture, where while she wears the TVs, getting a feed from them and playing her cello in a performance, she has become a living sculpture. On the right, she is playing a cello made by Nam June Paik out of televisions as well as strings. Another form of art is pop art. Pop art is still alive and well today. Pop art is about popular culture. It's about using popular culture and taking popular culture as the springboard for making art. Things that we all know, comic books, advertising, rock and roll TV shows, billboards, packaging, all being used as recognizable identities that can be manipulated into art. Klaus Oldenburg is a pop artist who makes a large copper clothespin. On the right, he's also working in unusual materials like paper mache. And in the paper mache, he's making what appears to be an old Pepsi bottle cap. But notice the Pepsi, the old logo for Pepsi, that it is becoming unrecognizable, it's dripping, and that dripping is always a signal for the abstract expressionist movement that had happened earlier. From Andy Warhol, we have seen him use silk screens to make celebrities, using silk screens and in a way of painting that wasn't done by fine art, it was done for commercial art. His earliest work in fine art, after he was a fashion illustrator, was he did silk screens of the entire catalog of Campbell's soup cans. And of course, Campbell's soup and all of the flavors of Campbell's soups, all 32 canvases correspond to all 32 flavors, which everybody would have known about this soup because there weren't a lot of varieties in soup at that time. Campbell's pretty much had a monopoly on the market. So this is something that everybody would have known. The antithesis of the abstract movement is photorealism. Here we see Chuck Close next to his painting of Philip Glass, a musician who studied under John Cage. He is part of the movement to make industrial and minimalism in music. Chuck Close is using a grid and a photo. He's gridding off the canvas with an airbrush. He's painting each individual square abstractly and coming up with an image not painted from life, but painted from photos that have blurry and clear areas that would be different than if you painted them from real life. A new kind of abstraction is also formed in hard edge abstraction, hearkening back to the European forms of abstraction. In Frank Stella's hard edge painting, the difference between him and, let's say, El Lissitzky is there are no focal points in these paintings. You can see how big they are too here. So in these paintings, they are all equal to each other. Your eye can enter and leave in any one place. Minimalism is a response to artists actually making work. In minimalism, Donald Judd isn't even making his work. He is instead having work made by factories or industrialists or fabricators who are making work based on his specifications. The human hand is absent. When you look at his cubes here in Marfa, Texas, when you see the steel cubes, as soon as you see the cube, that's what it is. The whole idea without any confusion. The notion that there isn't any story, there isn't anything beyond this, there's no symbolic meaning. It is what it is. We see minimalism still today. This is Anish Kapoor, his Cloud Gate, known in Chicago as the Bean. This is a large public art in Millennium Park on the lakefront in Chicago. It was several different pieces of reflective steel that were then sanded for a few years to get rid of the seams and now appear to be just one large piece of steel in the formation of mercury, a liquid metal. It has that quality to it, but is solid. The opposite, I think, of minimalism is process art. This is Eva Hess and her Contingent from 1969. It's made out of cheesecloth and latex, polyester resin, fiberglass, and there's 8 pieces, and the dimensions vary based on how they handled the resin and the process of making it. So she is giving up control the way Helen Frankenthaler was giving up control in the edges of her painting in unprimed canvases. She is just going to let the materials dictate how it's all going to work out. And in this particular body of work of process art, the latex has yellowed, grown brittle over the years, and eventually is going to be destroyed. As opposed to the bean, that will probably be here long after mankind has died out. Installation, we have studied installation in our sculptural work. In installations, entire works of art are becoming part of the room, or they are installed as environments. Here we're looking at Bruce Naumann's Green Light Corridor. When you're in the corridor, you have to slide through it, and the green color and fluorescent lights, when you're sliding through it, cause your eyes to lose sense of space. And even though it's kind of pressing in on you, your eyes are telling you something else. Olafur Eliasson is probably one of the greatest installation artists that I have certainly seen and experienced here in Los Angeles. I think this is one of the great projects of the 21st century. This is the Weather Project. It's mono-frequency lights that only allow your eyes to see yellows and oranges. The projection foil and haze machines are making a smoky atmosphere. The mirror foil, aluminum, is all causing a sensation that you are in a polluted, dying world with a dying sun, and this interior space kind of defies the logic of all of that. Body art and performance art. I want to show you kind of what they are and how they're a little bit different from each other. So the body can be used almost like a paintbrush or can be used as a tool. Here we're seeing Wies Klein, one of the paintings made, and then we're seeing one of the performances by Wies Klein on the right. His monotone symphony. He has a small orchestra playing just one note, and then that note is carried on while models dip themselves in a blue paint, a blue designed by Wies Klein, and they're rolling around on the canvas, making somewhat abstract art. So rather than the abstract art just being dripping or just being lines or something, it is made from a performance, and once the performance is over, if you experienced it, you saw the performance, or you see the artifact made from it in the painting. Performance art is when the artist is acting live, performing live in front of an audience. This is Marina Abramovic and Ule. They are performing Imponderabilia. They are standing nude in the doorway of an art space that has been enclosed, forcing people to brush up against both of their nude bodies. Being nude in public is a radical act, so when artists do this, they're always risking arrest. And these artists were arrested when the show happened. Now, that is early on in performance art. Now, performance art, artists get nude in galleries all the time. And it's not a big deal because they're not out in public. Kids aren't seeing them. Basically, it's like this in terms of the freedom of expression. You can be nude in a private space if the audience is asking for it. If that's what the audience has come for and they're not shocked by it and they are all consenting adults, it's okay for that to happen. So let's look at one slide with body art and one slide at performing again. So this is Ana Mendieta, a Cuban artist. Her silhouette here is a body of work that she was doing where her body is like a living sculpture that would be covered in mud, or here it's covered in plants. And we're not sure if we're looking at a cadaver. Is she part plant? Is she part human? She's using her body art here, as opposed to the performance still that we have from Marina Abramovic and Ule again, titled Rest Energy. In this piece, they are both holding on to a bow and arrow. Ule is holding an arrow. It's a live arrow with a real tip in it. If they lean back and he lets go of the arrow, it'll kill her. It'll pierce her heart. Around her heart is a microphone. So as they're leaning back and both holding each other up from their synergy, her heart is racing and he is being entrusted to not break her heart. In land art, we see artists getting away from the money involved, getting away from the capitalist spirit, if you will, involved in being in a gallery and making works of art that nobody owns. Andy Goldsworthy is doing that as he goes out in nature. He is playing with leaves and stones and ice. We saw him in our sculpture lecture. And also Robert Smithson with his spiral jetty. He is using tons of earth to make a design in the Great Salt Lake in Utah, in Salt Lake City, Utah. Maybe the most interesting art to come out of the 60s is conceptual art. In conceptual art that we studied from Sol LeWitt in our second lecture, Joseph Kosuth here with 1 in 3 chairs, we find that the idea is important, and whether or not the outcome or the visual is aesthetic or it's unpretentious, cheap, ordinary, unremarkable, that is absolutely okay. So in 1 in 3 chairs, we see a mass-produced chair, not particularly good shape. We see a photograph of the chair, and we also are looking at a dictionary definition of the word chair. I was always really struck by this artwork that the chair is not complete unless you have all 3 of these. Because if you don't have a word for chair, it's not a chair, right? And then you need the image or the mental template of the chair to build the chair. So Plato's idea that the perfect chair exists in the mind, and then the built chair is an imperfect version of that. So we have the image, the actual, and the word. And that is the completion of the idea and the object of the chair. Sol LeWitt was doing this with his wall drawings. The idea becomes a machine for generating art. He leaves instructions, and then other artists produce the work for him. In John Baldessari is associating these mass-produced dots with various meaning to them. They might be meanings that mean passive, that might mean platonic, and he is covering up elements of the photograph, maybe the focal points of the element, forcing us to really consider other elements. He plays a lot with images, playing around with senses of space and perspective as well. Video is a new way of artists to make artwork without needing film. In video, artists are able to work on videotape with cheaper cameras. On the right, we are seeing a TV that Nam June Paik has altered. So he's taken the feed of whatever image would be coming from the ether into the television, and then he's put a powerful magnet on top of the TV, creating these abstract images that you as the viewer can move around as you move the magnet and change the images. In Joan Jonas's video, in her glass puzzle, here, I'm going to show you just a couple seconds of glass puzzle. In glass puzzle, we are looking at a video taken of video on a screen. So we're not looking at the performer live. We are in fact, and you can see the reflections in the screen that we're looking at as well. So we're looking at a video of a video here, and we are getting reflections, we're getting the image from the video camera, we're getting these multiple images with this sound also that is creating this kind of musical cadence for us. And the last part of the lecture, feminism and feminist art. So the second wave of feminism in the 1960s is part of women trying to get equal rights, pass the ERA amendment, the Equal Right Amendment, which fails. They were trying to get a constitutional amendment ensuring that there is equal pay and equal relationships and opportunities between men and women. Judy Chicago is one of the very first feminist artists, and this is her massive dinner party from 1979. A number of other women help her to make this. We are looking at a triangle. An upside-down triangle has been a symbol for the woman's pubic bone for tens of thousands of years. And we have 39 places, 39 plates made out of ceramics that look like female vaginas and vulvas, and also look like various fruits and vegetables made out of ceramics. And then in the floor, they have carved in a number of other names of women who had never achieved maybe the fame that they probably should have for their work. So the 39 women are influential women, including Virginia Woolf and Egyptian pharaoh Hatshepsut. One of my very favorite artworks ever made is Mary Kelly's postpartum document. This is a 6-year body of work exploring the relationship of a mother and a child. Mary is into the theories of Jacques Lacan, a psychoanalysis, a psychologist, and he comes up with the mirror stage, a belief that in the mirror stage, we are born without language, and then we adopt language at about 18 months, and we begin to mimic and mirror language when we realize that our body is not part of mother's body. For a long time, mother does everything for us, feeds us, changes us, but we reach a state where we realize that we are separate from mother. And he believes when that happens, we begin to learn language, mimic speech, to more correctly get what we need out of life. So Mary is kind of creating these Rosetta Stones out of lead-type letters. She's printing, she's writing index cards, and then showing them framed as art, and they're really quite magnificent. So here in this one, we can see its utterance. The utterance is dare. I'm assuming the baby speak for there. The gloss, the meaning is baby is there when baby says dare. The function is existence, the baby recognizing existence. The age is 17.6 months, and this is February 1st, 1975. So she is exploring her child going from complete dependence on her to independence. And I don't know of another body of art that explores that. I don't know of any men who have explored that idea in art. And I also really like psychoanalysis from Lacan as well. So I also kind of found real meaning in her work that really affected me, struck me. Okay, So you have a quiz, short 5-question quiz, and then you have a lecture assessment from this. So the lecture assessment is like how we've been doing it. Number one, I want to know what your favorite part of the lecture was. 2 through 5, I want you to tell me things that you learned from the lecture. Have a good time with it, and I'll talk to you soon.